Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name is Noelle Osen, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the Kalamazoo Area Wild Ones 2024 opening program. 2024 is a special year for us. It's our 25th anniversary year, and we're looking forward to a number of informative and exciting events, of course, beginning with this evening's presentation by renowned Native Plant Authority and author Neil Diboll. Before we begin, we want to thank Jesse Davis and Jason Ballou, our outgoing president and vice president, for their dedication and leadership over the last few years. They successfully guided us through the trials of the pandemic, and we sincerely appreciate all of their efforts. Now, there are just a few details about tonight's Zoom meeting that need to be mentioned. All questions should be asked through the Q&A function. The chat box will be closed. Our speaker will field as many questions as possible after the presentation, but may not get to all of them due to time constraints. Everyone will be muted during the presentation. And this presentation is being recorded and will be available for viewing on YouTube within a few days. Now, I'd like to turn the program over to Tom Small, whom, as most of you know, is the founder of the Kalamazoo chapter of Wild Ones. Tom will introduce tonight's speaker. Tom?
Thank you, Noelle. This is our 25th anniversary year. And it was maybe just over 25 years ago that Nancy and I first encountered Neil Diboll at a Milwaukee Audubon Society native plant program in Milwaukee. Nancy and I traveled to Milwaukee several times for those conferences. They were good conferences, and we were looking for guidance in those early days. Neil was one of the principal speakers, and he was, and still is, in fact, the only speaker that I really remember from those conferences. He was the one who, above all, gave us the guidance we were looking for about native plants, about natural landscaping, and about what was and still is one of the most important things to Neil in his founding of the Prairie Nursery back in 1982, back in what he describes as his wild-eyed radical days when he thought all business was bad before becoming a businessman. And also in the sense that he has of why native plants are important, not just to save money, not just to use less water, less chemicals, but because of the need for people to reconnect with nature. And Neil now sees that as one of the principal reasons why his business has been successful, and why Wild Ones is successful, and why the native plant movement is really catching on nationwide and worldwide. That people are seeking guidance in reconnecting with nature. And Neil has been a person who just so generously and so wonderfully and so knowledgeably has made that connection and helped others to make that connection for these so many years, and particularly those more than 25 years that we've known him, and the more than 25 years now that we've had a chapter of Wild Ones here in Kalamazoo. So with that much, it's my pleasure and our pleasure as Wild Ones in this anniversary year to begin our whole series of programs with Neil Diboll. Neil, welcome.
Thank you, Tom. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for your kind words. And I truly appreciate that. And Um, this is our 42nd year in business. And I will say when we first started out, it was pretty rough because all the plants that we grew were weeds and nobody would buy weeds. I couldn't give this stuff away. But over the last 42 years, people have really come to understand the importance of native plants. And as you point out, not just for ecological restoration, not just for the money savings, water savings, fertilizer, getting rid of fertilizers and most pesticides, but the connection, our connection to the whole world. And I think that's really compelling, and it's getting more and more important. So thank you for highlighting that. That's great. So, but I like to say, I was Prairie before Prairie was cool, and now it's a wonderful thing to see so many people doing this and embracing it and connecting with the planet and understanding the importance of all life and how it's interconnected. So we will always emphasize that, and I think that it's great that we are finally seeing a change in our society. It's really a quiet revolution as people reorient their values towards stewardship, and stewardship not just as a park, but stewardship in their own backyard. And that tremendous amount of credit goes to the Wild Ones and the wonderful work that they do at the chapter level, at the national level. What a wonderful organization. What a loving organization. That's really the secret of Wild Ones, I think, is the care and the love that members spread with each other. And that's tremendous. So, well, tonight the program is about Prairie and Savanna plants for pollinators. It's a pretty long program, so I hope we'll be able to get to everything. But I was always also asked to just talk a little bit about a book that my co-author Hilary Cox and I published and was released recently, called The Gardener's Guide to Prairie Plants. So I'd like to show you a little bit, we'll just spend a little bit of time on that for those of you who are not familiar with it. This book was the inspiration of my friend Hilary, who said, Neil, we need to do a book that shows plants coming out of the ground in the spring, so my design customers, my clients, don't pull them out thinking they're weeds. And I said, oh, that's great. Plants coming out of the ground. Brilliant. How many people are going to buy that book? 20 of our closest friends, maybe? Well, it started to morph into something more than that. And then we started taking pictures. And then we said, well, we should show the leaves because people want to identify plants by leaves. Well, if you're going to do a book, you better have flowers. Oh, we better show the whole plant. Hey, it'd be really good to include the seeds so people can identify the plants by the seeds. And everybody wants to know what the seedlings look like. So before we knew it, we went from a single picture of a plant coming out of the ground to 6 or 7 pictures and various other ways of identifying plants that we included in the book. And then the publisher said, well, you better put a whole bunch of information here on prairie gardening and creating meadows, and it morphed into this giant book. So anyway, I'll just give you a little taste of that, if I might. And so this is the cover of the book, The Gardener's Guide to Prairie Plants. And it really focuses on the specific plants. That's the heart of the book and what they look like at their various stages of growth. But it's packed with information. And really, there are 4 really important parts of this book. One is the ecological concept of gardening and creating prairie meadows, gardening with transplants and creating meadows with seeds. And so we're looking at the ecology of the plants and looking at their root systems and how their different roots, tap roots and fibrous roots and rhizomes, work together to create the prairie sod. And they compete with each other, but they also are complementary. Then we look at the foliage and how the foliage helps to reduce weeds by broad spreading plants, reducing the amount of light at the soil surface, while the roots of the fibrous rooted grasses and other densely rooted flowers help to keep out weeds at the soil level. And basically creating the concept of a plant community. It's not just a garden, but it's a plant community. And I know Wild Ones, everybody in Wild Ones understands this concept of creating plant communities, but we do focus on that. And then we get into specific design concepts and the step-by-step procedures of designing and creating gardens and meadows from seeds. And we also focus on soils to make sure that people really evaluate their soils, because that's what supports the plants, and you have to know the soils in order to make the right decisions on the plants. But the heart of the book, again, is the plant ID pages. And I'll give you a few examples of that coming up. And then at the back of the book, we have extensive tables, 30 different tables that show you the different characteristics of the plants in the table, including, and I'm not going to give you all of them, but the soil types they grow in, the moisture conditions. A new thing that has never been put in the book that I'm aware of, and other people have told me, people who have written books, life expectancies. How long can you expect this species to live? And we divided them into 2 years for biennials, 3 to 5 years for short-lived perennials, 5 to 10 years for moderate early successional perennials, then 10 to 20 years for longer lived perennials, and then 20 plus years for long lived perennials, such as the compass plant, the prairie dock, the white false indigo, blue false indigo, plants that can live 20, 30, 40, 50 years, prairie dropseed grass, some of these plants that can live for an extended period of time. And then we also have deer resistance, and then a long list of the pollinators attracted, and not just your bees and butterflies, but also includes predaceous wasps and parasitic wasps and beetles and flies, moths, etc. And it's impossible to get everything complete, but there's a lot of information in there on it. So that was a big factor in making sure that we provided all this information in the table. So they're very useful in many regards. So you can see here, there's 12 chapters, how to use this book. It's very short. History and ecology of the prairie. We'll look at a little bit of that. Understanding your soil. Again, focusing on making sure you pick the right plants for the soil. And then designing, planting, and maintaining prairie gardens, which is a gardener's guide. And then the Prairie Species Field Guide, Chapter 5. That shows the photos of each plant at their various growth stages. And then establishing a successful prairie meadow using seeds. And then burning your prairie safely. And it's really pretty easy as long as you take the necessary steps. So we outline those. And then we get into the details of propagating prairie plants from seed and propagating prairie plants vegetatively by divisions, etc. And then a section on the prairie food web with different insects, arachnids, small mammals, large mammals, birds, etc. And then tables of prairie seed mixes, and then 30 tables of the plant characteristics, pollinators, etc. So quite a bit of information there. I'm going to skip through some of these slides pretty fast. This shows a very general representation of the prairie at the time of settlement around 1830, 1840. So to the west, in the rain shadow of the Rocky Mountains, you had the short grass prairie, which seldom got more than a couple feet tall. And in the east, in the pink, you had the eastern tallgrass prairie, and a transition zone in between them in the gray, the mixed grass prairie. So, and as you can see, this is a very general map. There's much more prairie in Wisconsin, and Michigan isn't even listed. Of course, there were prairies in southwestern Michigan, but it's a very general map. A more detailed map in the book shows, this is from the University of Northern Iowa, shows very detailed, much more detail, and you can see prairies. And I know around Kalamazoo, there are a number of prairies. I've seen them on the railroad tracks there in that dry, sandy soil and other locations. So we're going to skip through some other information here just so I can get to some examples, excuse me. So here's examples of Chapter 5, the plant descriptions. And as you see, this is for butterfly weed. It shows you a general description, the habitat, garden uses, hardiness zone, light requirements, soil types, soil moisture, bloom time, height, and life expectancy. Butterfly weed, usually 10 to 20 years. Root type, it's a taproot. So I know that if I'm planting a taproot, I want to plant some fibrous roots next to that to make sure I can control the weeds that would otherwise grow around that plant because a root doesn't encompass the surface soil. Okay, and propagation, aggressiveness, deer palatability, and distinguishing characteristics. How do you tell this plant? So, and it's interesting because butterfly weed is one of the few Asclepias that doesn't have a white sap. So that's a really easy way to tell it when it's young. And then this is the most important part. This shows you the different stages of the plant. In the upper left, you can see the seedling, and every species has a seedling. And then below that, you see the mature plant emerging in spring. So you can tell it as it's coming up in spring. And then over to the far right, upper right, you have the leaves, and you can see there's a little bit of caterpillar dung on those. So, and you can actually see the monarch caterpillar, if you can see that in the upper right. And then you have the whole plant in the center. And then in the lower center, the flower, and to the left, the close-up of the flower, and in the lower right, the actual seed pods. So, and also at the bottom, it says we have look-alike plants, and this is helpful. There are plants that might look similar, so we list them, and we separate them out into natives and non-natives. In the case of the butterfly weed, we only have a native look-alike, but other than that, there are many species that have non-native look-alikes. So you get all this good information on it. And so we did 148 different species, and there are 19 grasses and some 129 flowers, something like that. But here, just an example of a grass. This is Cytodes grama, and everybody pretty much knows how to tell Cytodes grama when it's in seed. Okay? And most of the time for grasses, for a lot of people, that's the only time you can really identify it unless you really know the plant well. Little blue stem is pretty easy to tell. Prairie dropseed is pretty easy to tell. But some of these are a little tricky. So Cytodes grama in seed, yeah, that's easy to tell. But most people don't think that, hey, you know what? Grasses have flowers. Most people don't think of them as flowers. Of course, wild ones know better. So we have pictures of the flowers. And so you can see the male orange stamens and the white female pistils of cytoscramma flowers. You got to get up pretty close to see this. Okay. And really important, when a plant is a grass is not in flower or not in seed, one of the most important ways to identify that grass is by the ligule. And you can see in the case of cytoscramma, it has this really, really fine hairs at the ligule. The ligule is the point where the leaf meets the stem on the grass. And on cytoscramma, those hairs will go about halfway up the leaf. We don't show the whole leaf, of course, but these are diagnostic characteristics so that people can tell grasses when they are not yet blooming, flowering, etc. And of course, we also show the seedlings. So this is really the heart of the book, is to be able to identify plants. So it's really designed as a field guide. So without further ado, I just wanted to let people know what's in this book and how they might be able to use it. So I think that will give you some pretty good ideas as far as what this book contains. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me and I'll be happy to help you. Now, if I can get back to where I need to be. I'm so adept at this, I'll tell you. Here we go, share screen. Let's go share again. Let's go to our main program now. Now, where did that one go? Well. It was just here. Here we go. All right. And let's go to slideshow. And from beginning. You're not giving me from beginning. There we go. Pardon me while I work my way through this. So, what is it about, what makes a prairie landscape different from what I call here the all-American landscape? You can see the nice color coordination between the flag and the fire plug, and the liberal use of ornamental shrubs, but basically it's grass, because grass is what we got to do, because it's an unwritten, tacit, socioeconomic pact in middle class and upper class America, is that you have a lawn because a lawn is our shared consciousness. It is a shared value. And the lawn came into being in the United States basically post-Civil War with the rise of industrialism, middle class, upper class, and suburbs. So people moved to the suburbs. And interestingly, the great landscape architect, Frederick Law Olmsted, called the lawn the great democratizer of America, because everybody shared it and lawns ran from one house to the next. And so everybody was in on the deal. And because of this aspect of the lawn, it really has no real value agriculturally. It tells people that, hey, I have enough money that I can have this totally useless landscape that I spend money on because I got enough money to do it. Now, that's my particular analysis, but I think that's part of it. And so it became propagated over the last 150 years as the go-to landscape. So it's not that people are somehow attached to it visually or aesthetically, but more so socioeconomically, because it is a status symbol and it is a way that we identify ourselves as part of a group that is middle class, upper class, etc. So that's my theory. You can take it or leave it, but that's what we're up against, folks. Because if you talk about native plants rationally with people, why don't they understand? Why do they have to cut it down? Why do they call the weed police and have them cut down your beautiful prairie? I mean, we're seeing less and less of that, but it's still happening. It's still happening in Wisconsin, where they're trying to, because it's this socioeconomic pact, and you violate it at your own risk. So that's my opinion. So make sure that when you have that landscape, that you use nonlinear lines for interest. And when you plant those trees, make sure you know what they're going to do when they're mature. It's interesting. This is not too far from my house, and that house is now gone. The trees are still there, but the house is gone. I guess they got tired of the Hansel and Gretel effect and tore the house down and moved it 50 feet away. Anyway, and make sure you have flowers in your landscape, but don't let them get out of control. Keep them in that little box. Okay, we got to keep them under control, because remember, we are in control of the landscape, and that's another aspect of the lawn. It's all about control. We are the boss. And so to meet nature halfway, which is really what natural landscaping is about, we're meeting nature halfway. It's a joint venture with nature. We're not controlling her. We are working with her. I think that's another thing that scares people, because a lot of people are just plain afraid of what they consider non-organized, disorganized chaos in the landscape, which is actually a strength of the landscape. But they don't get it, and they have to keep everything under control. So they mow the lawn within a half inch of its life, and that makes them feel good. And also make sure to include lawn ornamentation in your landscape. Very important. The nearest town to me is called Friesland. People there are from Holland, and lo and behold, there is some good Dutch heritage there. I know you have quite a bit of that just north of you along the western part of the state, along Lake Michigan, up by Holland, Michigan, and other related areas. So now, what's the compromise? Here's the compromise. It's not all prairie. It's not all lawn. This customer is on very dry sand, and they were really sick and tired of trying to take care of a lawn. They don't have a perfect lawn. They mow it a few times, but they just put in one bed a year. So after 4 or 5 years, they had these beautiful prairie beds, and they put in some hollyhocks. They're not purists. They put in a few other species that they like, and there's no reason why you can't do that. As long as they're not aggressive invasive plants, you can put grandma's plants in there or your favorite perennials. And so sometimes you get these blended gardens, but they're mostly native prairie plants that will grow on this super dry sandy soil without watering, fertilizing, etc. And you can see a couple of views of it. Oh, excuse me, that's a different one. This is another one. This is not actually a garden, but this is a seed mix. This is our septic seed mix planted on dry sand over a drain field. And rather than bring in topsoil and spend thousands of dollars on topsoil and grass seed for a few $100, they put down a prairie mix, a dry prairie mix, which looks great. It has fantastic habitat value. And in this case, they attract Karner blue butterflies, which is a federally endangered butterfly because we are in the Karner blue habitat zone in central Wisconsin. And this has been in for over 30 years, and every spring they call me and tell me how beautiful it looks. So 30 years is not bad. And a lot of people will convert their entire front yard into a prairie, as was done here, again, on a dry sandy soil, which is not uncommon in your areas. It's a great option. No fertilizer, no irrigation. It just makes sense. It makes good ecological sense. It makes economic sense. I'm preaching to the choir, I know. But what a great look. Isn't that better than a lawn? Yeah. Of course, this was all seeded. This was not installed with plants. This is the 4th year of the seeding, and this prairie is going strong 25 years later. Now, here are the root systems. This is really important. And this may be the most important slide we're going to look at tonight. You can see the tap roots going deep. And notice that this is 8 feet deep. And the roots are still going down in some cases. Some prairie plants have roots 10, 12, 15 feet deep. And of course, that's a great adaptation because it allows them to get soil nutrients and moisture during drought. And it really extends their ability to obtain what they need to grow. As opposed to a lawn, a Kentucky bluegrass lawn usually doesn't go much deeper than 6 inches. You can see your shallow rooted prairie grasses. This is June grass. They're only about 1.5 feet deep. Your little blue stem on the right goes about 4 feet deep. So, and then you've got the deeper rooted forbs, tap rooted forbs. You see cream false indigo in the middle of a low growing plant. That's going down 7, 8 feet deep. So they're pretty amazing as far as their ability to get down. And of course, this is what built the fabulous prairie soil, mostly the grasses. The average grass abandons about 1/3 of its roots at the end of the growing season every year. And where does that root material go? It turns into organic matter. And of course, the forbs do this too, but the grasses are the most abundant as far as the contribution of organic matter to the soil, which created these tremendously rich prairie soils, which then allowed for the growth of the American economy and industrialism, because now you had extremely productive farms, and they were no longer subsistence farms trying to grow food on rocks in New England or played out clay in the Southeast. You had these amazing prairie soils, which allowed families to produce massive amounts of food cheaply and feed people as they moved into cities, leading to the rise of industrialization and the American economy. So America owes a tremendous economic debt to the prairie just because of what it has provided as far as food, and societies and cultures really run on food. If you run out of food, you're in big trouble. America has cheap food because it has great soil where it can grow lots and lots of corn and beans, etc. It doesn't necessarily get used efficiently and turns into high carbon food like steak, but still, it has allowed for the growth of our economy over the last 150 years. So let's look at the plants. We're here to look at plants, and I know many of you know these plants already, and we're going to have to zoom through these pretty fast, but and a lot of these are going to be good for your dry soils. I'm going to read we're going through them alphabetically in order, and these are prairie plants that are attractive for butterflies, not only butterflies, but are particularly adept at that. Okay, and most of your plants that attract butterflies are non-white flowers. There are exceptions, of course, Okay, but white flowers are more general. This is a generalization. Are pollinated primarily by bees, bumblebees, wasps, etc. But your butterflies will usually go to the blues, the pinks, the yellows, oranges, reds, etc. Generalization, but fairly true. So this is lead plant, Amorpha canescens, does great on dry sandy soils. It's 2 to 3 feet tall. This is so incredibly drought tolerant. It has a very deep root, and it's actually a shrub. So, and it's very long lived. So, well, lives well over 20 years, and it mixes really nicely with the grasses. You can see it here, mixed with some short prairie grasses. In this case, I think mostly Cytoscrama. And here's a picture of the flower. Gorgeous coloration, the contrast of the gold with the purple, bluish purple. And a lot of people say that this plant was called lead plant because of the colors of the leaves and the flower buds. Others in southwestern Wisconsin said where there was a lot of lead mining back in the 1820s to the late 19th century. A lot of people said that this indicated that there was lead in the soil below. That's questionable, of course, but there are many thoughts about where the name came from. And here's an exception, the Canada anemone, Anemone canadensis, which does attract quite a few butterflies. And interestingly, you want to be very careful with this plant because it creeps by rhizomes, as one of my customers calls it, Canada enemy, because it can take over. So I'm not showing a lot of aggressive plants here tonight. This is a really great plant for a ground cover in semi-shade in moist soils or in full shade in moist soils as well. It really prefers a moist, rich, organic matter-laden soil, but great ground cover if you don't want anything else in there. Okay, so you can see that butterflies will come to the Canada anemone. Great plant, as long as it has room to run. The red milkweed, swamp milkweed, marsh milkweed, Asclepias incarnata. This is a monarch butterfly caterpillar favorite. So people have documented that this is a preferred food for monarchs. So if you have clay soils, which I know many of you in your area do not, but if you have clay soils, this plant loves clay. If it likes a damp soil, and even if you don't have a really rich soil, it will grow there. This is actually growing in some pretty sandy soil, some pretty dry sandy soil. So it's a fairly variable plant. If it gets really dry, you may want to water it if it's in the garden, but it's pretty adaptable. But it's a great plant for attracting monarchs and growing caterpillars. Here's a close-up of the marsh milkweed. Again, a wonderful plant. Unfortunately, not that long lived. Usually maybe 10 years, somewhere in that range. And here's one of my favorite stages of the plant, and this is part of the book, is showing the fruit, the seeds. I mean, this is art in itself. Everybody plants for almost always for the flowers. Not always. We'll see some examples other than that. But what about the seeds? I mean, to me, that's architecture. Incredible. So we have this interest in the prairie garden, and in any garden for that matter. We have this interest at all stages, including later in the year when they've stopped flowering and have gone into seed. Here's a relatively rare plant. This is Sullivan's milkweed, Asclepias sullivantii. And for those of you who would like a milkweed that is not as aggressive as common milkweed, which I'm not showing here because it's really not a great garden plant because it creeps and crawls and takes over, the Sullivan's milkweed, sometimes called prairie milkweed, is an excellent choice because although it creeps by rhizomes, it's much less aggressive. It's a little persnickety. It doesn't like real dry soil. It doesn't like moist soil. It likes a good loamy soil in full sun. And it has these beautiful pink midribs in the leaves, and the flowers are a little bit larger than the common milkweed. So it's a great plant, and much plays well with others, as opposed to the common milkweed, which likes to take over. Here's a close-up of the Sullivan's milkweed. Beautiful flowers. And of course, the butterfly weed. Everybody loves butterfly weed, Asclepias tuberosa, aptly named because it attracts so many butterflies. And is great for those dry, sandy soils. Doesn't like a heavy soil, really needs the sand. Here we see a coral hair streak on the butterfly weed. You think there was some coevolution here, maybe? Look at that color. Almost identical. And the great spangled fritillary. Looks like he had a run-in with a bird. He or she lost a little bit of its wing. It's a jungle out there, folks. And of course, the monarch caterpillar on the butterfly weed leaves. Asters. There are a number of great asters. This is sky blue aster. I prefer the old name, Aster azureus. You know, the new name. This is what's the problem. This is the aster disaster, where all the asters have been deported to the genera Symphyocarpum, Oligoneuron, Dolingeria, et cetera, et cetera. Like, who wants to call them the way these kooky names that really are hard to remember, hard to spell, but hey, that's botany for you. And once the Pharisees take over the rules, you're in big trouble. So what used to be called Aster azureus is now Symphyotrichum ulintangiensis, and you will be quizzed on this. So Symphyotrichum ulintangiensis, formerly Aster azureus, makes sense, right? Aster azureus, sky blue aster. Not anymore. Great plant. Look at those beautiful blooms. And here it is in seed. I like it just as much in seed as I do in flower. Many of these plants are really attractive, and you can bring them indoors. Some of these you may need to spray with a fixative, like a little hairspray, to make sure they don't fly around your house, but they make really great arrangements in the fall. And the smooth aster, Aster laevis or Symphyotrichum laevae, beautiful flower, longer lived than the sky blue aster. And here you see a beautiful clump of the smooth aster. And the New England aster. This likes a little bit better soil, doesn't like dry sand. Those two will grow in almost any soil, the sky blue and the smooth. The New England aster, which everybody knows, but we won't spend a lot of time on it. But hey, look at that seed. Man, look at that. I get beauty at all times of year. This is like late November, and there's still something going on in my prairie garden. I get to go out there and enjoy this. Well, after all the other flowers are gone, because the New England aster is one of the last of the asters, the last of the flowers to bloom. And then I get the seed heads in November and December. White turtlehead. This is the obligate, this genus Chilone glabra, is the obligate genus for the, oh gosh, butterfly. Oh boy. Okay, it's been a long day, folks. Sorry. Baltimore checker spot butterfly. And so it is really restricted, like the lupine is for the Carner blue butterfly. The Baltimore checker spot relies on the leaves of genus Chilone. So this is our native white turtlehead, Chilone glabra. And look at that turtlehead. Kind of looks like a turtlehead. Beautiful little white flower. And here is for dry sandy soil. We've got the lance leaf Coreopsis lanceolata. I'm sure many of you also have this. And look at that beautiful flower. That it says happy spring to you. And the butterflies will come to this in July and really load up on nectar. Purple prairie clover, Dahlia purpurea, great plant for the garden. This is one of our most popular plants, and it's easy to see why. Beautiful flower, long-lived. Look at that close-up. Another great color combination with the yellow and the purple. Nature doing its beautiful thing. And good old pale purple coneflower. This is, I don't believe it's native to your area. I think just south of you in Indiana, you'll find this. Echinacea pallida. This is longer lived than purple coneflower, the Echinacea purpurea, another great plant, of course, as we all know. The thing about pallida is it's much more tolerant of dry, sandy soils, and it has a taproot rather than a fibrous root like the purple coneflower. It's also much longer lived. Purple coneflower, you might get 10 years out of it if you're lucky. Pale purple coneflower usually will grow 10 to 20 years, individual plants. Of course, you're relying on these plants to hopefully reseed, so you're not dependent upon the original plants that you established, either from transplants or from seeds. And in a well-managed prairie, that's typically the case. But the pale purple coneflower will give you a longer lifespan of 10 to 20 years as opposed to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years for the purple coneflower. If you plant them together, you get the pale purple coneflower blooming in June and July, and then the purple coneflower starts blooming in July and runs into August, even September. So you can get up to 3 months of purple coneflower with just these two species together. Slightly drooping petals, one of my favorite plants. Super reliable, tough. And bumblebees and all sorts of critters will pollinate this. But butterflies too. And then in the fall, what's this? Oh, look at those beautiful seed heads. It's a bird feeder. And not only is it a bird feeder, the birds are going to peck those seeds out of there in the fall and winter. And then in the spring, that is going to be a singing host or a singing perch for male birds in the breeding season. And so they will, by leaving your prairie stand up, whether it's a garden or a meadow, stand up as long as you can in the spring before mowing or burning it at the sometime in April or even early May, depending on where you are and what you're trying to do as far as management. You leave these up and they perform another service for breeding birds. And of course, the purple coneflower. Who doesn't like purple coneflower? Not a true prairie plant. It's really a savanna plant, but it does well in full sun. And it's phenomenal for butterflies. I mean, so many different types of butterflies will come to it. The fritillarians, it's just a never-ending panorama of butterflies that come to it. Swallowtails. So what's not to like about purple coneflower? And when you're looking at great genera besides the echinaceas for attracting butterflies, Eupatorium, or now Eupatorium and Eutrochium. Many of the Eupatoriums have been moved to the genus Eutrochium. So this is tall Joe Pyeweed. And I don't know if that's, I can't remember if that's a Eutrochium fistulosum or if it's still a Eupatorium fistulosum, but I think it's a Eutrochium fistulosum now. But anyway, it's tall Joe Pyeweed. When the common name is more reliable than the Latin name, you know you've got a problem, folks. So that's where we're at. It's pretty sad. But this plant can get 10 feet tall. I don't know if many of you have grown it, but it normally grows in marshy areas. I've been able to grow this in my sandy loam in light shade, where it doesn't have a lot of heat stress. It's on the east side of a building. It gets morning sun, and it's shaded in the afternoon. So I'm able to put it into, it's a pretty high organic matter soil. So I'm able to move it into a situation where it would not normally grow in a more well-drained soil with good organic matter, but not wet, because it is protected from the afternoon sun. And this is really an important consideration in your gardens. If you look at, let's look at the north, south, east, west relationships of gardens, or in a woodland situation on those edges of the woods, the south edge, the north edge, the east edge, the west edge. So let's just look at a house, for instance. The south, of course, is the hottest and driest because it gets the brunt of the afternoon sun, direct sun, midday, and in the afternoon. The west side is second hottest, and sometimes can be almost as hot as the south side, because not only do you have the sun in the afternoon, but you have two other factors that come into play. Number one is the prevailing winds in our region tend to be from the west, which can desiccate the plants. And number two is that the air in the afternoon typically, on average, has a lower relative humidity than it does in the morning or midday. So not only is the wind blowing on plants on the west side of a house or on the west side of a woods, okay, but you're also experiencing a lower relative humidity, which desiccates the leaves faster. So the west side can be just about as hot as the south side. The north side, of course, is cooler because it's blocked from the sun, except during May, June, and July when the sun is quite high in the sky. But for the most part, it's shadier, and so more shade-loving plants will grow there. And then the east side is the Goldilocks side, because that's where you can grow almost anything. You can grow woodland plants, you can grow prairie plants, because on the east side, you get only morning sun, as we were talking about earlier, and you do not get that hot, drying sun and wind on the east side in midday or the afternoon. And in the morning, if you have dew, the dew has to be evaporated before the temperature of the leaf will rise typically, or rise significantly. And so you might have a number of hours where that leaf temperature may stay nice and cool because the dew is evaporating. And so it's really protected from a significant heat stress during the early part of the day. And so you're able to really be flexible on the east side of a house as far as what you can grow. You get enough sun to grow prairie plants, but you also get enough protection and coolness to grow a lot of your savanna and even some woodland plants. Now, when you grow woodland plants on the east side of a house, they oftentimes, especially spring ephemerals, they will go dormant earlier in the season because they are getting more sun than if they were on the north side of a house or in a more shaded situation like a woodland. But that gives you a fair amount of flexibility on the east side. So that's what I've done with this tall Joe Pyeweed. By putting it on the east side of a building, I'm able to grow it in a soil situation and a moisture situation where it would not normally do well. So you can kind of cheat the system here a little bit just by working with the ecology of the site and the combination of sun, soil, wind speed, and relative humidity. And the tall Joe Pyeweed and the Eupatoriums in general are fantastic at bringing in butterflies. And this is our regular, quote unquote, Joe Pyeweed, Eutrochium maculatum, formerly Eupatorium maculatum. Not as tall, 5 to 6 feet tall. This is a marsh plant or edge of a marsh. It really does need good moisture. But it's not quite as spectacular because it has smaller flowers than the tall Joe Pyeweed. But it's beautiful in its own right, and bumblebees absolutely love it. And you can go down to the marsh or to your garden where you're growing this. And in the evening, in the fall, when this is blooming, it usually blooms in late summer, and the temperatures where we live can drop fairly cool to the point where bumblebees are kind of stranded on top of the Joe Pyeweed. And you can go and pet the bumblebees, which is really cool. I know it sounds weird, but bumblebees are, they're really very docile animals. You can catch them in your hand and hold them in your hand as long as you don't crush them, and they won't sting you, because it's really not in their interest to sting you. And as long as you're not really harassing them, they won't bother you. But you can just go down and pet them. They're not real excited by that, but you're not harming them in any way. So funny little things to do in the prairie garden. Oxeye sunflower, Heliopsis helianthoides. This is not a really great garden plant because it tends to self-sow. It's a great meadow plant, but you want to use it very sparingly in a seed mix because it can get a little crazy. But it's a great little plant. Look at that beautiful flower, stunning flower. Very happy yellow flower. and butterflies will come to this. It's not a tremendous butterfly attractant, but it is a great plant for that. And now the liatris. Liatris are one of those great genera that attract tremendous amounts of butterflies, a wide variety of butterflies. And we have a number of blazing stars from which to choose. I'm going to show you 4 here. This is the rough blazing star, sometimes called button blazing star, Liatris aspera, and it is phenomenal in groups. When you put it in masses, it looks just fantastic. This is a corm, which is a modified stem, not a bulb, but it looks like a bulb, but it's actually a corm. But that's a plant physiology technical point. But here's a close-up of the flower. Unlike most of your other liatris, the flowers are borne individually on the stem. They're not tightly close together as they are with prairie blazing star, dense blazing star, and most of your other blazing stars. So it has a very different form and look. This really does best in a dry, sandy soil like you might have in your area. It doesn't like clay. In fact, it will grow in extremely dry sand. It prefers really sandy soil. It actually can grow on sand dunes in central Wisconsin. Liatris ligula stylus, meadow blazing star. I know you think this is a fake picture, and I went out and I caught a bunch of monarch butterflies and gassed them and then stuck them on here with pins, but in fact, no. That is how attractive the meadow blazing star is for monarchs. In fact, in the lower left flower, there was a 5th monarch that flew away before I could snap this picture. Why is this? Well, nobody really knew until about 15, 20 years ago. Somebody did a study, and they found out that the meadow blazing star flower produces monarch pheromones. So it's using sex to attract the butterflies to pollinate it. So it's fooling them, thinking that they're going to have some sort of a encounter, but it's just a pheromone that the flower actually produces to attract the monarchs. And it's the unfortunate thing about the meadow blazing star. It is one of the shortest lived of all our blazing stars. Most blazing stars live 5 to 10 years. That's their life cycle. Okay, but the meadow blazing star usually is only 3 to 5. So beauty is so fleeting, and this is a perfect example of that. But wow, when it's blooming, oh man, I tell you, the meadow blazing star is just tremendous, and butterflies love it. My first love of prairie plants was the prairie blazing star, Liatris pycnostachya. I saw this for the first time in 1977, and I was like, what in the world is that? That is so beautiful. I want to grow that. And that's what got me hooked on prairies. This single plant right here. When I saw that, I thought, oh my God, look how pretty that is. Look at that beautiful lavender. So I said, okay, let's try this out. And here I am. How many years? 40 something years later. 1977. What's that? Is that 47 years? Oh my God, too long ago. Here's a close-up, and you can see the liatris bloom from the top down. Most flowers bloom from the bottom up, but this liatris bloom from the top down. Again, you don't just get butterflies, you get bumblebees and a vast array of other pollinators that come to the liatris as well. And color combinations. Unfortunately, I'm not showing you a lot of color combinations tonight. We do list combinations in our book, in the Gardener's Guide to Prairie Plants. Many different color combinations are available, but look at this great combination of the Liatris pycnostachya, the prairie blazing star, and the wild quinine, Parthenium integrifolia. And here's something that's really important when you're looking at designing prairie gardens, meadows, etc. Yes, yellow is the most common color of flowers in the prairie, but a close second is white. And so you have a lot of whites that you can combine with pastel lavenders, blues, pinks, etc., to create absolutely gorgeous color combinations. In fact, some people will do that without any yellows at all, and they will create a pastel prairie garden that contains just whites, pinks, purples, blues, lavenders, etc. And it can be quite stunning. I like yellow too, so I don't mind having that in my gardens. But you have all sorts of different options when you're designing a garden. If you are not looking at just diversity, but looking at design characteristics, you can create these pastel colored gardens by combining the whites with these other non-yellow colors. And meadow blazing star, or excuse me, dense blazing star, we just did meadow blazing star, dense blazing star, Liatris spicata, which generally grows in moisture, marshy type situations, although I have seen this growing in dry limestone quarries in northwestern Ohio. Unbelievable, growing in the cracks of the limestone. Wow. There must be just enough moisture in that soil, and when limestone also degrades down to clay, which is has a very high water holding capacity. So that must be the secret. The plants are stunted; they're not as big as they would normally be in a moisture environment, but they were growing there. So, and what's interesting about the dense blazing star is that it will bloom later. It's one of the later blooming of your blazing stars. So you can have this blooming in September, late August into September, when the other blazing stars are pretty much done. So we'll extend not only your bloom time for blazing stars, but also your pollinator visitation time and butterfly enjoyment time as well by planting them. And hey, guess who else we got? We get the hummingbird moth. And that's not restricted to the species by any stretch. This is a diurnal moth that comes out in the daytime as opposed to the night. They look like hummingbirds, but wow, are they fantastic. What a great garden visitor, and the lichens are particularly good at attracting them. Another choice for dry sandy soil is a lupine, Lupinus perennis. It has a deep taproot. In fact, when you grow this plant from seed, when the seedling is 2 inches tall, the root is a foot deep, 6 times longer than the shoot, because it has to get down into that sand where it can get moisture, because it's growing in extremely xeric conditions, extremely dry soils and dry sand. And you cannot grow this in good soil. It will not grow in good soil. Even sandy loam it will struggle in. You put it in loam, it's dead. Clay, forget about it. Forget about it. It needs dry sand. So if you've got a really sandy landscape, sandy soil, lupine is one of your best choices. And here we see it. This is a field of lupine with some little blue stem. Not a lot of diversity here. This is actually a production field where we used to grow lupine. This is an old field, but wow, what a great plant. And it's a great problem solver because it also, not only does it grow in dry soil, it doesn't need irrigation, but it's a legume, so it adds nitrogen to the soil, which the other plants can benefit from as well. And what about the leaves? Let's just look at the leaves. I mean, is that cool or what? So every little aspect of the plant is just attractive, beautiful. And of course, the Carner blue butterfly, the federally endangered butterfly, which now is really almost limited to Wisconsin. There are a few outliers, as I understand it, in Michigan, but it used to be in Western New York, but the development and who knows what other factors are causing a shrinking of its habitat. And so we are the stronghold here in central Wisconsin, where we have lots of lupine plants on our dry sands that occupy what they call the central sands of Wisconsin, which are glacial outwash sands that were deposited by the glaciers 12,000 years ago, and which makes for really lousy farming, but great prairies. Bergamot, everybody knows bergamot, but it's a great butterfly plant. Okay. Fritillaries, everybody, well, not everybody, but lots and lots of plants come to the bergamot. Isn't that great? Oh, man. That's one of my favorite flowers. And the yellow cone flower, Retivita pinnata, everybody knows this plant, so we won't waste a lot of time on that. But black-eyed Susan, yep, we know that guy. But wow, beautiful flowers. And a surprising number of butterflies will come to this. So most people don't think of the rudbeckias as great butterfly plants, but indeed they are. And sweet black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia subtomentosa, which is a strong perennial, surprisingly underutilized. And it does best on a richer soil. It is actually grows well near floodplains, mesic prairies, decent silt loam, loamy soils. But in a decent garden soil, you should have very good results with this. And it gets 5 to 6 feet tall, and it lives well over 10 years, generally 10 to 20 years. So as opposed to your other Rudbeckias, most of which are short-lived or biennials, this is a strong perennial. The sweet black-eyed Susan, Rudbeckia subtomentosa. There's the flower. Another happy yellow flower. Looks very similar to the regular biennial black-eyed Susan, but it's taller and it will come back year after year after year to delight you and butterflies and other pollinators. Rudbeckia triloba. This is another biennial. This thing is covered in flowers. It has a super black center and butter yellow flowers. Petals. And man, oh man, this is attractive. Be careful. In some situations, it can be aggressive by seed. And I have seen these plants can grow 3 inches tall in a really dry soil in partial shade, up to 6 feet. When they just have 3 or 4 flowers on it, up to 6 feet tall with hundreds and hundreds of flowers in a rich silt loam soil in the sun. So it can be very aggressive if not controlled in certain situations, but it is amazing as far as its adaptability, but it is a gorgeous, beautiful plant. And of course, butterflies will come and visit it. Then the goldenrods. Goldenrods, great for butterflies, but I'll tell you what, goldenrods and asters are phenomenal general pollinator plants. And I'm sure many of you know this because you've seen what comes to visit your plants. But an underutilized goldenrod is the Ohio goldenrod, Solidago ohioensis. And this is simply a phenomenal plant, not only because it's lower in stature for people that want a more compact goldenrod, it's very full. It's not tall and scraggly or anything like that. It does not creep by rhizomes. In fact, we do not sell it. Well, we only sell one rhizomatous goldenrod, and that's Solidago flexicalis. the zigzag goldenrod for woodland gardens, and you want to be very careful with that. We're not looking at that tonight. But the Ohio goldenrod, which generally grows in like boggy areas, fens, moist soils, it will grow in any good garden soil. And the leaves hold up well all season, and the flowers are huge. And the variety of pollinators that will come to all the goldenrods is nothing short of phenomenal. So this is a terribly underutilized plant that I think more people should use in their gardens. Stiff goldenrod, everybody knows that, Solidago rigida. Uh, but man, you want monarchs and other butterflies, bring on the stiff goldenrod. Stiff goldenrod can sometimes be aggressive by seed. It varies on the site. I have seen situations where one of my clients had way too much stiff goldenrod. It was taking over her prairie. And then something got in there, some disease or insect or something got in there and knocked it down. So there were natural controls that got it back under control. So is that going to happen in a situation where every time? Who knows? But it certainly was amazing in her site. We were trying to figure out how to manage it, and then one year it just kind of got self-managed by Mother Nature. Another stiff goldenrod, monarchs, etc. And my favorite goldenrod, showy goldenrod, Solidago speciosa. It's just a wonderfully structurally beautiful plant, and this grows in really dry sand. And I don't know if you all had the same drought that we had in 2012, which was a summer drought. It was a terrible drought, worst drought that I can remember. And we actually broke the July 1936 average temperature, high temperature record in Wisconsin, which was considered an unassailable record. The average temperature in the month of July 1936 was broken in July of 2012. It was so hot and so dry. And there were prairies where plants that I had never seen go dormant before in really bad droughts like 2008 and excuse me, 1988 and 1976. But the prairie plants were like going dormant. The showy goldenrod never skipped a beat. It was bulletproof. It doesn't have super deep roots. I don't know. I do not know how it did it, but it just kept growing and looked great, and it bloomed beautifully later in the year. Unbelievable. So what's really nice is it has this very structural pyramidal flower, and it just looks great, and just has a really nice form, and it is tough. You got sandy soil, and it'll grow in loamy soil. I wouldn't try it in clay. It'll probably do okay, but none of it's compacted clay. But this thrives, really shines in sandy soil. Showy goldenrod. And the pollinators that come to it, you can see a few on here. Absolutely incredible. And of course the butterflies as well. And here we see it in seed. Again, in my opinion, almost as pretty as when it's in bloom. The beautiful silvery seed heads of the showy goldenrod. And the verbenas. Verbenas attract a number of different butterflies. This is Verbena hastata, blue vervain. This is a marsh plant or a wet prairie plant. It's only a biennial, so not a great garden plant. I just wanted to show it to you because of its structural value. And a better plant, in my opinion, is the Verbena stricta, the hoary vervain, because it's a perennial. And it will usually live 5 to 10 years. Again, it's not one of these Methuselah plants like the compass plant or the white false indigo, but it is incredibly tough. This grows in my gravel driveway. We have all sandy soil, so it's just gravel over sand. We drive over it all the time. It doesn't seem to bother it. So, and it's spreading by seed into the driveway. So there was just one plant to start with a few years ago, and then 3, and now probably, I don't know, 20. And so, hey, that's nice. I love this plant. Great, great foliage, actually, and beautiful flower. So this is the hoary, Hoary vervain, Verbena stricta. And there's a close-up of the flower. And of course, you can see pollinators all over. Now, this is being pollinated by flies. Butterflies will come to this. But again, so many of these are pollinated by a wide variety. And there's so many native flies, and really harmless flies, not like house flies that cause all sorts of potential issues of health. These are native flies that don't bother people. And some people think that they're wasps and they're going to sting them, but they're not. They're just doing their job pollinating things. And here's another color combination. This is the hoary vervain with butterfly weed, blooming in July. So you have this great lavender, purple, and orange combination, opposites on the color wheel, more or less, pretty close to opposite. And so they're really complementing each other, and a really nice garden combination here mixed in with some prairie grasses. The Vernonias are also really good, the ironweeds. So this is common ironweed, Vernonia fasciculata, one of my favorites. Excuse me, I'm sorry. This is tall ironweed. That doesn't look like regular. That's tall. That's the big guy. It has larger flowers, larger leaves, and this can get 8 feet tall, 5 to 8 feet tall. and really attractive flowers. Look at that color. This is a color you don't commonly see in prairies. Prairies don't have many reds or oranges. The only orange really is the butterfly weed, and then you've got cardinal flower for the reds and a few others. But you also have Silene regia, the royal catchfly. But that's a little picky as far as its environment. We'll see that later. But the tall ironweed, Vernonia altissima, or maybe it's, I don't know if they've changed that name too. Probably have. Let's see, that used to be, I don't know, they keep changing these names. I can't keep up with them. So, and here you see the common ironweed, Vernonia fasciculata, which is smaller, lower growing, but nonetheless excellent for attracting pollinators, butterflies, etc. That would be the other name for Vernonia altissima is Vernonia gigantea. So I believe that that is the new name. So here you see a close-up of the flowers of common ironweed, Vernonia fasciculata. Again, monarchs and many other butterflies will come to this. Great color, great attraction for pollinators. And there's the seed heads. What's not to like about that? Get out your little brush. Brush, brush, brush. Looks like some kind, you're going to scrub something with that. And the violas. This is Viola pedata, which unfortunately we're not able to produce efficiently, so we don't offer this anymore. But this little bitty plant is the host plant for the great spangled fritillary butterfly, which will eat its leaves. So this significantly large butterfly utilizes violet leaves at the caterpillar stage. And what a beautiful plant it is. Great for sand. If you can find this, man, it's great for dry sandy soils. Hard to find. Here's a close-up of the flower. Absolutely gorgeous. And here's the seeds. These are exploding seeds. This is another reason why it's so hard to propagate this. We do it vegetatively because the seeds explode. And this is an extraordinary photo here because these seeds did not pop out of the seed pods. Normally they pop out. So this was unusual that the seeds were still retained. So you can see the violet seeds after the pod has opened but didn't fully explode. And golden Alexander's Ziziaria host plant for black swallowtail. And here, oops, excuse me. Oh boy. Wow, there seems to be a photo missing. I'm sure many of you have grown Ziziaria, golden Alexander, and there's also Ziziaptera, heartleaf golden Alexander, which are host plants for the black swallowtail butterfly. Sorry about that, folks. Let's go into plants for hummingbirds. So we have the columbine, eastern columbine, Aquilegia canadensis. And does anybody know what family this is in? I know you can't answer this question, but surprisingly, this is how I got an A in botany in college, because this was not something that we were told, but I knew this from my own studies. The columbine is in the buttercup family, and you would never guess that. It doesn't look like a buttercup, but the actual flower structure is determined to be a buttercup family structure. I knew this from my hikes in Colorado with my family. We would go on wildflower hikes when I was a kid, so I blame all of this on my parents. It's all their fault. And I would look in the books and learn the plants, and lo and behold, wow, the columbine's in the buttercup family. Great hummingbird plant. And there's close up of that beautiful flower, the eastern columbine. And of course, here's the hummingbird. This plant really likes partial shade, and it generally does best in a limey soil, pH over 7. Doesn't like acid soils generally. And here's a really fascinating plant. One of my favorites is New Jersey tea, Ceanothus americanus. Now, why is this called New Jersey tea? This is actually a shrub. It gets about 2, maybe 3 feet high maximum, and the width or girth is similar. Well, it's called New Jersey tea because it grows in the pine barrens of central and southern New Jersey. And there was a little event in 1773 in Boston Harbor. There was a little party, a little tea party thing going on. And the colonists, who were very upset with the Brits for a variety of reasons, threw the tea into Boston Harbor, and King George III said, well, no more tea for you, which is why America is a nation of coffee drinkers today. But what did the colonists do? Being tea drinkers at the time, they had to find a substitute, and their substitute was this plant, the New Jersey tea, which grew in the New Jersey pine barrens. Now, why is this a hummingbird plant? The flowers are white. They're not the size that it would be to have nectar for hummingbirds. So let's look at that. What in the world would make this a hummingbird attractive plant. And I couldn't figure this out, why the hummingbirds were coming to the New Jersey tea in the nursery. What is going on with this? And finally, I read something about it. Well, first of all, you have to know what pollinates New Jersey tea. And they are pollinated almost exclusively by small flies and parasitic wasps. But lots of flies. No house flies, but these little miniature flies. And what in the world were the hummingbirds doing there? Well, of course, they don't live on that sugar water alone. They don't live on nectar alone. They were coming to eat these small insects because they had to get protein. So this is super important for hummingbirds to have a protein source. And so if you plant the New Jersey tea, you would almost certainly see hummingbirds, assuming you have hummingbirds in your neighborhood, you would almost certainly see hummingbirds coming there to eat the small flies, wasps, etc. So very important for the hummingbird diet. And here's the seed head of the New Jersey tea. It turns from green to kind of pink to black. You can see there's one ripe seed in there. And these are also exploding seeds. These you can actually collect before they explode, unlike the violets. Well, you can collect the violets before they explode, but you're on your hands and knees and you have to get them exactly the right stage. New Jersey tea is a little more forgiving, so you can collect that seed, but you got to be Johnny on the spot. As soon as they turn black, you need to collect that seed. Tall blue larkspur, Delphinium exaltatum. This is really a savanna woodland plant. Beautiful plant. You can grow it in the sun if you have a good rich soil. A great hummingbird plant. Of course, you can see by that throat on there, and it's definitely a hummingbird type plant. And the fireweed, Epilobium angustifolium. This is more common in northern Michigan and northern Wisconsin. This photo I actually took in Colorado. You can tell that there's some places in the UP that might look like that, but this is actually in Colorado. So really, this is a fabulous hummingbird plant. So many people will plant this, not only because it's beautiful, but to attract hummingbirds. It is rhizomatous, so it will spread. So you want to give it room to run if you're putting this in your garden. And it likes a rich but loose soil. So you want to have high organic matter content, like a really good sandy loam with lots of rich organic matter, and it should do very well for you. It will also grow in a good silt loam, but it doesn't like to be too damp. Here's a close-up. This is after a rain. You can see the water on the petals of the fireweed. It's called fireweed because it commonly invades areas after a fire. In fact, after Mount St. Helens blew, this was the first plant to colonize the area, among others, but this one was the one that was most obvious. And it's very typical after forest fires in the west that you will see fireweed moving in within a matter of a couple of years, which of course is where it got its name. And the irises. This is Iris virginica shrebii or Iris shrebii, the wild iris. Iris versicolor also is great. Hummingbirds will come to the iris. It's not one of their preferred nectar sources, but they will definitely visit your irises. It's amazing what they will visit. Here's a close-up. Beautiful plant. Of course, it needs wet soils. It actually will grow in standing water or mud or a really rich soil, but don't let it dry out. And the fabulous Turk's cap lily, Lilium michiganense, sometimes superbum. Superbum is more considered the southern variety now. Michiganensis is our more northern. This is pretty tough plant to grow. We don't have it in production right now. Well, it's in production, but we can't sell it because we don't have enough. But what a great hummingbird plant. Just a fabulous plant all around. Just a really great plant. Again, it needs a rich organic soil, moist. Don't let it dry out. But it will grow in full sun or part shade. Here you can see a close-up of the Turk's cap lily or the Michigan lily more properly. And hummingbirds love this. Cardinal flower, of course, everybody knows cardinal flower, Lobelia cardinalis. This is a short-lived perennial, usually only 3 years, maybe 4 if you're lucky. And a lot of customers will call us up and say, hey, I killed my cardinal flower. Well, no, not really. It just died because that's only how long it lives. 3 years usually, maybe 4. So again, beauty is so fleeting. Why is it the most beautiful plants sometimes don't last that long? But this will grow. You can put this in a pot and put it in a pond, and it will grow underwater. There's just slightly, it's at the soil, where the water's at the soil level and where it's saturated. It will also grow in a decent garden soil. It will grow in shade. It will grow in full sun as long as the soil is rich. And a longer-lived lobelia is the great blue lobelia, Lobelia syphilitica. Hummingbirds do not find this quite as attractive as the cardinal flower, but they will definitely visit it, and this plant will live 5 to 10 years, as opposed to the 3 to 4 years for the cardinal flower. Here's a close-up of the flower. Slightly different from the cardinal flower, but close. But not that brilliant red. And if you have really dry sand, beard tongue. Penstemon grandiflorus. This, unfortunately, is another one of those short-lived plants, 3 to 4 years, like the cardinal flower. But my God, when it's blooming, it is phenomenal. and hummingbirds will flock to this as well. Here you can see a close-up of the flower. Tailor-made for hummingbirds. Penstemon grandiflorus beard tongue. It will only grow in dry sand. Don't put it in a good soil. And here's the seed pods. And look at those leaves. It has leaves like eucalyptus leaves, and they're thick and they're rubbery. The leaves are really cool. But the seed pods are pretty cool too. And downy phlox. Phlox pilosa. This also is a dry sandy soil plant, but it will grow in a lot of various types of conditions. It will actually grow in slightly damp soil too. This is kind of a tricky plant. This also has exploding seeds. Very difficult to collect the seeds if you're interested in that. But a beautiful little low-growing plant. Usually doesn't get much more than 10 to 16 inches high, maybe a foot and a half, 18 inches. And it likes full sun. It doesn't really like much. It'll grow a little bit in the shade, but prefers 75% sun or more. You know, again, fairly adaptable, but it tends to grow in dry soils and moist soils, but not in between for some reason. Downy phlox. Here's a close-up of the flowers. This is a little bit lighter variety. And obedient plant, or as some who have grown this in their gardens would call it, disobedient plant, Physostegia virginiana. Great for hummingbirds, but not great for the other plants in your garden because it likes to take over. So really, on this report card says does not play well with others. So you may want to be very careful where you put this. This is like the Canada anemone or Canada enemy. Put it somewhere where it's going to be by itself, where you want a ground cover. Those are two really good ground cover plants, and they both grow in rich, moist soils with high levels of organic matter. And you put them in that situation, and they will take off. But don't put them with anybody else because they don't respect boundaries. And great Solomon seal. This is a white flower. You think, well, gee, would hummingbirds come to a white flower? Indeed, they do. Polygonatum, Canaliculatum, Polygonatum biflorum, variety Canaliculatum. I don't know what name it is this week. So, but great Solomon seal will get you there. Okay. So actually, a surprising number of hummingbirds will come to this, or surprising utilization by hummingbirds will come to that. Of course, we only have the ruby-throated here, but they will visit this plant, even though it has white flowers. Here are the seeds of the great Solomon seal. And wild petunia, another great plant for dry soils. Ruellia humilis. Humilis meaning low growing. It's humble, and it will spread out not by rhizomes, but by stems. And it blooms for a fairly extended period of time during the heat of summer into the late summer. And another great hummingbird plant, because you can see that just the structure of that flower is going to bring in the birds. And here's a close-up. Very attractive little flower. And there's the seeds. And look at all the little hairs on that. And those are designed to reduce water loss because they create a boundary layer around the leaves, which slows down the wind speed, and thus you have less desiccation because the wind is moving slower, so it takes away less moisture when the stomata are open on the leaves to obtain carbon dioxide and expel oxygen for the photosynthetic process. So dense leaves on plants really help to reduce water loss by slowing down the wind around them. And there's the seed pods when they're ripe. It's kind of cool in its own right. So these are sort of pictures that you'll see if you do purchase the Gardener's Guide to Prairie Plants, which is available at various online booksellers. We don't sell it ourselves because it's simply not cost effective. We can't compete with the Amazons and the other online booksellers. So we don't even attempt to do that. And Salvia azurea, blue sage. This is not really a native plant to our area, but it is a great hummingbird plant, and many other pollinators will come to it. But it's kind of a cool plant. I grow it in my dry, rocky soil. I have dry sand, and I have rocky dolomitic hills. And this does quite well in those high pH 7.3, 7.4 dolomitic hillsides in the sun. There's a close-up of the flower. Again, blue sage. This plant, unfortunately, gets a little tall and lanky and does tend to flop over. So even in my completely non-fertilized, pretty tough growing conditions, it will get pretty tall and can fall over. So beware on that one. And again, the royal catchfly, a fabulous, fabulous plant for hummingbirds. Silene regia. Regia meaning royal. That's the name, royal catchfly. So this is a fairly long-lived plant, 5 to 10 years, not a lot. It needs a well-drained soil. Do not put it in a damp soil. Do not put it in a clay soil. A sandy loam or a loam is really good. And it has pretty much a tap root. And you will get tremendous utilization by hummingbirds. So let's see how we're doing on time here. We are at 7:43. So I think we have time to look at prairie flowers for attracting bees and parasitic wasps after we have this final look at the close-up of the royal catchfly. So, oh boy, here's the seed head. Don't forget the seed head. Look, little urns. Just fantastic. You gotta get down on your hands and knees to see this, but it's really quite attractive. Or you can bring them inside and make arrangements out of them. All right, let's look at plants that attract, and not exclusively bees and parasitic wasps, but are known for their ability to do that. So we'll start with the lavender hyssop, Agastache funiculum, which is an incredible bee plant. Some people will plant this just to bring in bees. If you want bees, plant lavender hyssop. Not terribly long-lived. Sometimes will self-sow. It does creep by rhizome, so it may be able to maintain itself for an extended period of time. You can divide it relatively easily as well if you so desire. So one of your top bee plants. Here's a close-up of the flower. And nodding pink onion. Again, we're going to look at a lot of white flowers because white flowers, not exclusively, but a lot of white flowers bring in bees and other similar pollinators. So nodding pink onion, Allium cernulum. Here's a close-up of the flower. And being an allium, it's completely deer tolerant or resistant. Deer do not bother this at all. And it will grow in full sun to a surprising amount of shade. One of my prairies on my property is at the woodland edge, and it has actually sort of crept into the edge, the western edge of the woods where it gets afternoon sun. And here's a close-up of a bumblebee saying, "Hey, when do you guys open? I'm ready for some pollen. Let's get it going, guys." So they're ready. They know it's in there. They're just waiting until it's ready. Canada milkvetch, Astragalus canadensis. Not much for attracting butterflies, but bees, really good. Really good. Be careful if you're using this in a seed mix. Don't go crazy. It can get a little wild from seed. It doesn't creep by rhizomes. It's got a taproot, but it can be a little aggressive. So use moderate amounts of this. We use very small amounts in our seed mixes. And here you can see the seeds. Really cool. They start out green, and then you can see towards the bottom, they're ripening from the bottom up, and they turn into this more black color as the seeds inside them become ripe. Cream false indigo, one of my absolute favorite plants, Baptisia bracteata. Very, very long lived, as with all the Baptisias. I mean, this plant, I know plants that are 40 years old. So can it live 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 years? I don't know. Now, there are some plants that I suspect, and there are other ecologists who suspect that some of these prairie plants live as long as 80 years or more. It's just really hard to monitor plants for that long in one lifetime. So you have to have a continuity of the monitoring, which is difficult. So this is a legume, also adds nitrogen to the soil, just as the purple prairie clover does, as do all the other Baptisias. And here's the seedling. Is that a cool seedling? It's kind of backlit. You can see the veins in that little seedling of the cream false indigo. So even at the seedling stage, every one of these plants has its own beauty. This looks like a stained glass window with only white and green, but still pretty darn cool. And here is the cream false indigo as it emerges from the soil. Yeah. And the white false indigo looks like an asparagus. The cream false indigo has a much darker color and a very interesting structure as it's coming out of the ground in spring. Usually this would be right around early May. And here's the white false indigo. This gets 5 or 6 feet tall. The cream false indigo only gets 2 feet tall, very seldom much more than that. So they're very different. And you'll see that this has a long stem, so it does not suppress weeds by itself. And you'll notice that it's planted here with grasses, mostly little blue stem. Because if I don't plant the grasses around it, and there's another prairie flower there, I can't recall exactly what that is. If we do not have the grasses and other fibrous-rooted flowers around it, you're going to get weeds underneath there. So you need to make sure that you understand the ecology of each of these plants, both at the root level and at the foliar and stem level, in order to make sure that you have a low-maintenance garden or a low-maintenance meadow, and you have all the ecological niches covered so that you don't have weeds being a problem, thus creating a true low-maintenance landscape. Here's a close-up of the flower. I'm sure many of you have grown this. And then the seed head. What a great centerpiece for dried arrangements. It's the white false indigo seed pod. These can sometimes get 2-3 feet long. And if you're into dried arrangements, this is a fabulous, fabulous addition. Here they are at maturity when they're black and the seeds are ripe. Here's a really unusual plant. This is pale Indian plantain, Cacalia atriplicifolium. Actually, this is now Arnoglossum atriplicifolium. So they have changed the name on this one too. This is pollinated almost exclusively by wasps. And you will see predaceous wasps on there, stinging wasps that we would consider stinging wasps, but a tremendous amount of parasitic wasps. And this is what's important about these groups of plants here, especially this and Eryngium, which we're going to see in a little while, the parasitic wasps. And the parasitic wasps perform so many important duties in keeping other insects and other creatures under control. And as E.O. Wilson says, there's a group of the wasps, the bees, and ants, okay? The Hymenoptera. And E.O. Wilson, the great entomologist from Harvard who passed away a couple of years ago, said the Hymenoptera is what keeps the world under control, because there is a parasitic wasp for just about every other insect, arachnid, etc., that will parasitize it, whether they're parasitizing the eggs, the larvae, the caterpillars, the pupa, or the adults. And I had a client many, many years ago who planted just a small 1,000-square-foot area to one of our prairie mixes that had rattlesnake master in it, which we'll see in a little while. And this would be also the same if you had one that had the pale Indian plantain, probably, because they are primarily pollinated by parasitic wasps. He had a terrible problem with tomato hornworm on his plants until his prairie started blooming, and the problem disappeared. And it's almost for sure that he had parasitic wasps that attacked the tomato hornworm that were supported by the rattlesnake master plants in his garden, thus getting them under control by natural biocontrols. And he says, my prairie is my pesticide. So after all his efforts of trying to control it with chemicals and everything, once he planted a prairie, bingo, he was good to go. So, and this is phenomenal if you are a seed collector. If you collect the seeds of the Arnoglossum, the pale Indian plantain, and take off all the little flyer pieces, the papi, and hold them in your hand, they will move around in your hand by themselves. It's really weird. I talked to this guy who was a professor in Europe, and he said, I've worked with over 6,500 different species of seeds, and I've never seen this before. And I said, that's the only one I've ever seen do it. So really one of those small, weird, interesting things about a species. If you are working with a seed of pale Indian plantain, it will actually move around by itself in your hand. Here we see the whole plant. It has generally purple stems. The leaves also have purple highlights sometimes, and they are like rubbery. Very, very cool texture. And this can get up to 8 feet tall, even 9 feet, seldom 10. So they'll get 5 to 8, 9 feet tall. And here's the flower. You'll see lots and lots of very small parasitic wasps and sometimes flies, bees, etc. on this plant. There's the leaf. And you can see that purple stem. Really cool. Another great bee plant is wild senna. Senna hebecarpa, formerly Cassia hebecarpa. And it is just irresistible to bees and bumblebees. Both will flock to anything in Cassia. There's another eastern plant called Cassia marilandica, or Senna marilandica now. And there's also an annual that we don't use in gardens because it doesn't last long. But the wild senna is an amazing bee plant. And here you can see the seeds. Again, that's another legume, giving you free nitrogen in your garden. And you get these really cool bean pods. So here's a whole nother addition to the garden, these chocolate bean pods in the fall. And of course, birds will relish these. Shooting star, Dodecathion media. This is an early spring ephemeral that grows in prairies and in savannas. And here you can see sometimes it has a pink coloration to it. And this is pollinated primarily by bees. Not exclusively, but you'll see lots of bees on this in the spring. Bees and bumblebees, a lot of bumblebees. And here's the rattlesnake master, Eryngium yuccifolium, which we were talking about earlier. And again, pollinated very much by parasitic wasps. And they just really will attack almost every garden pest you've got, and the good guys too. Some of them attack butterflies. So it's a mixed bag. But there's ones that attack spiders and ticks. And it's just amazing. If you read about parasitic wasps, it's truly phenomenal what they do. Here we see a close-up of the rattlesnake master flower. I'm sure many of you also have grown this. This needs a better soil. It doesn't like a dry, sandy soil. It'll kind of grow in there. It seems to also prefer alkaline soils. It can be a little dodgy if you're in a low pH soil, like in the low 6s or lower. But I've seen situations where you get into heavier clays, well-drained clays in southwestern Wisconsin, which tend to have high pHs because they're derived from dolomite and limestone. And every once in a while, this plant will go crazy. And it's so interesting to see in one situation where the plant, a certain species, just kind of minds its own business, and in another situation, it goes wild. So if you got the right growing conditions, certain species will really respond. And here we see the rattlesnake master emerging in spring. And it looks like a yucca, hence the name Eryngium yuccifolium. This is one of my favorite plants. It's just really good all year long. And here's prairie smoke, Geum triflorum. Another early blooming plant. This generally blooms in May, depending where you're located. And this is a plant that we do not grow for its flower. You can see those little red balls in there. Well, that's the flower. Not much to look at. What we're really looking at here, and you can see this picture was taken with the wind blowing to give you that little extra movement. We're growing this for the seed heads and the foliage. Fantastic foliage. But we're not growing it for the flower. We're growing it for the seed head. And here we see an early seed head. It's not mature yet because you can see at the point of attachment that the seeds are green, so they're not ripe yet, but you're already getting that pink smoke look in the seed head. And here's the flower. Not much to look at. And guess what? Guess what family the prairie smoke is in? This is in the rose family of all things. Would you ever guess that this plant is in the rose family? Well, it is. That's botany for you. And then here we see the leaf. Really nice leaf. This only gets about 6 to 12 inches tall. So it's a great ground cover. It creeps by rhizomes to form a patch. You might have to do a little weeding in it, and it loves dry, sandy soil or rocky soil. People grow it in heavier soils, but its normal habitat is in really dry sand and rocky soil. And what I call dogtooth daisy, some people call it sneezeweed. We sold this as dogtooth sneezeweed, and nobody would buy it. We changed the name, and sales increased. But this is a great plant for all sorts of pollinators, but bees and parasitic wasps will also come to this. This is Helenium autumnale, blooms in late summer. You can see the interesting, look at that. You can see the yellow spider in the upper right, and it caught some sort of fly. It's like, you're mine now. The jungle out there, folks. It's really interesting how it has those bifurcated or indented, I should say, indented petals. It's a very interesting plant. This generally likes a moisture soil, but it's a great late season bloomer. Now, back to dry sandy soil, this is a biennial. This is dotted mint, Monarda punctata. This is a great, great, great plant. It looks fantastic. And you look at those purple flowers, they're not flowers. Those are modified bracts. They are actually leaves. So this plant, quote unquote, figured out to anthropomorphize. It figured out that, hey, if I can make these purple leaves, I can attract pollinators. And so it will bring in all kinds of various pollinators, including bees, wasps, etc. Let's see if we can get a close up of that. There we go. So the flowers are those little bitty guys closer in on the stem. And all that purple, those are modified leaves. This loves dry sand. It generally will not grow anywhere but in dry sand. Unfortunately, it is a biennial, but if you have areas where you have open sand adjacent to where you grow the plant, it will generally self-sow and propagate itself. Can't be guaranteed. It also tends to be cyclic. And we have some old abandoned farm fields, many of which were abandoned in the 30s during the dirty 30s when the Dust Bowl and the drought. And we had a Dust Bowl in Wisconsin. It was really pretty extreme here. And I've seen sandstorms in Wisconsin on open, when people didn't do as much no-till years ago. You don't see that as much now with no-till farming. But this plant seems to have outbreaks, like big years where it'll just be dominant in these dry, sandy old fields. And then you won't see it for 5 or 6 years. And then boom, you'll have another year where it dominates that field. It's very interesting behavior. So, dotted mint, beautiful little plant, but again, a biennial. And smooth penstemon, Penstemon digitalis. This is the only penstemon in the Midwest that I'm aware of that will grow on a heavy soil. All the rest need a really rocky, sandy, well-drained, dry soil. So Penstemon digitalis, sometimes called foxglove beard tongue, is another great plant for bees, wasps, etc. You can see that little throat there. A lot of insects will just slide right in there. So we have the rosin weed. This is what, and we're getting into the silphiums now. This is Silphium integrifolium. This is lesser used than the others. And we'll look at 3 other silphiums. Now this one can be sometimes be a little aggressive, but it's a beautiful little plant. It gets about 6 feet tall. It doesn't get as big and tall as the others, maybe 7 sometimes depending on your soil. But again, visited by many, many pollinators. You'll sometimes actually see butterflies on them, but you get a lot of bees, insects of other parasitic wasps and other insects. You can see the flower, and most of the silphium flowers are quite similar, as I'm sure many of you know who have grown them. And their seed pods also are quite similar, but they are different in their own regards. So here's a more popular plant, is the compass plant, Silphium laciniatum. Called laciniatum because the leaves are lanceate, or lanceolate, lanceolate. And the flower, very similar to the rosinweed, but different in its own right. And there's the leaves, beautiful leaves. And I would plant this plant just for the leaves. Flowers are great, seeds are kind of cool, but really this is a plant that I would plant for the foliage more than anything else. And here we see it in a production field called compass plant because the leaves tend to align themselves north to south, which is exactly what they're doing. So if you're lost on the prairie and you find a compass plant, you'll know north and south. You may not know where you are, but at least you'll know north from south. A very cool plant. These are little plants. These are only like 4 years old. They're very slow growing, but there are documented cases of this plant being over 70 years old. Very long lived. And here we see the first frost of the season on the compass plant. Look at that. That's like not available in any store. Absolutely gorgeous. And I can get this right in my own yard. And now we have the big bruiser beast, cup plant. And I'm sure many of you have grown cup plants, sometimes to your chagrin. What a fabulous, fabulous bird plant, because all the various characteristics. You have the cups where the water is held after a rainstorm, so birds and insects, etc., will come for a drink. And you've got birds coming there to eat the insects that come to pollinate the flowers, and then birds go crazy on the seeds, and unfortunately they will spread the seeds around, and then you'll have cup plant everywhere. So this is a plant to use with great caution. And even though it grows naturally in semi-shaded riparian woodlands, it is adaptable to almost any situation. You put it in a heavy clay soil in the sun, it'll go crazy. You put it in a rich organic soil in the shade, it'll go crazy. A friend of mine grew this thing. I don't know if we see a picture of that. 12 feet high. Let's see if we have a picture. There he is. So he's on the north side of Chicago. And that is a 12-foot tall. He's 6'4". So it's a 12-foot tall cup plant. And it's in his woods. And he planted it. And it just went crazy. And you may know this gentleman is Brett Rappaport. He used to be the original legal guy, reference or legal lawyer for the Wild Ones many, many years ago. So he had a very, very influential time at the Wild Ones, helping when it was really getting going, and just a fabulous guy, and has done so much to contribute to Wild Ones. It's unreal. So, but be careful with the beautiful cup plant because it can get out of control. A much more well-behaved plant is the prairie dock, Silphium terebintinaceum. That's a mouthful. Silphium terebintinaceum. The prairie dock with the really cool leaves. Again, very similar to the compass plant as far as its structure of the flowers. But look at the leaves. Not divided at all. A little bit of the edges are indented slightly, but nothing like the compass plant. But these can look like small elephant ears. They can get 2.5 feet tall. So another great plant just for the foliage. Not to mention the value of pollinators and the seeds for birds. Here we see a close-up of the flower. And let's move right along here to Tradescantias, prairie spiderwort here in this case, Tradescantia bracteata. It grows in very nice clumps. And unlike other Tradescantias, like Tradescantia ohioensis, which we're going to see shortly, this plant holds up much better in the summer. Tradescantia ohioensis, or Ohio spiderwort, tends to go dormant after blooming, usually by early to mid-July. It's just a crumpled up mass of black dead leaves. But the prairie spiderwort tends to stay green through much, much later into the summer. So if you're looking at a garden situation, you would probably want to use the prairie spiderwort rather than the Ohio spiderwort. The Ohio spiderwort is great in a prairie seeding or meadow because the other plants grow up all around it and cover it up. Okay. This is Western spiderwort, Tradescantia occidentalis. This is a pretty aggressive rhizomatous plant. We don't sell it anymore because I don't know, people didn't want to use it anymore. But if you have a dry sandy spot or a dry rocky spot where you want cover, put in some plants of this and stand back. It will take over. I mean, it will take over. It's amazing. And you can see the flower. It tends to be pink, although it can be blue, usually pink. So that's the Western spiderwort. And here's the Ohio spiderwort, blooming in June. It's about 3 feet tall, maybe 4, but it does really crumble by mid-July. But there's beautiful flowers. And if you're going to collect the seed of this, you wait until there's one flower left blooming, but all the seed pods, as you can see in the middle, those are seed pods that have finished blooming. They're still green. If you wait until the seed turns brown to collect it, you'll get a handful of dust. There will be no seeds because the seeds drop while the pods are still green. So the best time is to collect the seeds of the Ohio spiderwort, and most of the spiderworts is when there's in the morning, they bloom in the morning and they close up in the afternoon. If it's a shady day, shady afternoon, they'll rebloom. But on a normal summer day, they will basically stop blooming by noon. So you go out and collect it in the morning, and if there's one bloom remaining, you then grab that pod, all those pods, and you'll end up with this inky blue hand from collecting the seed, but it washes off right easily, and it's not problematic. So it's very counterintuitive. Most seeds you wait until they're brown and ripe, not the spiderworts. They're collected when they're still green, and maybe one flower is blooming, like the last flower to bloom on that stem. One of the absolute best plants, and one of my favorite plants, is Culver's root. Again, I'm sure many of you have grown this, Veronicastrum virginicum. This will grow in full sun. It will grow in partial shade. Here's actually on the north side of a woods, doing beautifully. And it likes a rich soil. It will grow in clay. It will grow really, if you give it a nice loamy soil with some good organic matter, it is phenomenal. So, and what a beautiful plant. This is just a super, super classy plant. Again, another one of our white flowers. So it is going to give us really good opportunities for bringing in bees, wasps, etc. So that's what I have for tonight. I hope this has been helpful. I'm sure many of you know these plants very well. I hope I've given you some insights into the specifics of the species and some other little details about them and how you can use them in the garden and just some general garden tips. So I will now exit from the show and we can go from there.
Thank you so much, Neil. This is Quinn Edwards. And on behalf of Kalamazoo Area Wild Ones, I just want to say thank you so much for helping us kick off our 25th anniversary year. And thank you for sharing your insight on Prairie Plants. I definitely learned some things. We have a couple questions coming in. Since we're past 8 o'clock, maybe we'll just do one or two. One is from Steve Allen. He says, not having buffalo, what are your methods to keep grasses from dominating your larger installed prairies?
That is a great question. How do we prevent grasses from dominating prairies? Because most people do not have the grazers like buffalo, elk, etc., that were present on our prairies before settlement, and they help to keep the grasses under control because they're predominantly grass grazers. Okay. Well, there's two ways to do this. Number one, well, there's more than that, but the two primary ways and easiest ways are, number one, make sure that your prairie seed mix consists of a high ratio of flowers to grasses. Okay, when I say high ratio, okay, our prairie seed mixes, they're variable, like our pollinator mixes and our butterfly mixes are 50% grasses and 50% flowers by weight. Okay, most of our mixes are 60% grasses and 40% flowers by weight. So you say, well, gee, that's way too much grass. Okay, but that's by weight. But the true measure of a seed mix is seeds per square foot. And so if you look at most of our 60-40 grass to flower ratio seed mixes, the actual ratio of seeds per square foot is inverted. And so typically it's 60% flowers and 40% grasses by seeds per square foot. So you have 50% more flower seed in that mix than grass seed at the time it goes down on the ground. Okay. And in our 50-50 mixes, those generally are running about 70-75% flowers and 25 to 30% grasses. So we have 2-to-1 ratio actually more than 2-to-1 ratio in those mixes. Okay. So that's the first step. Go easy on the grass. Okay, make sure you have a good representation of forbs. Okay, because what you put in the ground on day one is what you're going to get 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years later. Okay, so that's super important. Okay, the flowers cost more than the grasses in almost every case. Prairie dropseed is an expensive grass seed, and let's talk about prairie dropseed. Fantastic grass, but it's very sensitive to seeding date. So the best time to plant prairie dropseed is in the fall as a dormant seeding, or in the early spring, usually before May 1st, because it does not germinate well once the soil warms up. Or you can do a frost seeding in February, okay, before the soil warms up. So you have a fall dormant seeding, a late winter frost seeding, or a very early spring seeding before May 1st. Okay, that's just prairie dropseed. And prairie dropseed is really expensive, and you want to make sure you get results from that seed. Okay, but back to the other way that you can ensure that you have a high ratio of flowers to grasses is to seed your prairie in the fall. Okay, because what we have found, and this is indisputable evidence, the vast majority of the prairie flowers show significantly higher germination when seeded in the fall than in spring because of the exposure to cold, damp conditions that breaks dormancy in the seeds. On the other hand, many of our warm season grasses like big bluestem, little bluestem, Indian grass, and Cytotrema do poorly when seeded in the fall. Something happens to that seed when it's installed in the fall as a dormant seeding, and we get significantly reduced germination of those warm season grasses the following spring as compared to having seeded in May or June. Okay, I mean, really significant reductions. So I can take the exact same seed mix and plant it on the exact same soil, the exact same field, divide that planting area in half, and plant half in the fall and half in the spring. I will have a completely different prairie 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 30 years later, just based upon the planting date. And so what many people have found is a frost seeding, which occurs in late winter, gives you more of a balance. The grasses don't seem to deteriorate as much, but you still get the dormancy breaking in the forbs, so you get the best of both worlds. But frost seedings can be tricky because the ground has to be frozen, and you don't want too much snow cover, and you don't want icy cover because the seed will blow off of the ice. So, and if the soil thaws when you're out there with your tractor or whatever you're seeding it with, oh my God, it turns into a huge mess. So you got to get it timed right, and you don't want a lot of snow because you have a big seed on top of a lot of snow and you have a big snow melt, then the seed washes away. So generally speaking, most people will seed in the fall as a dormant seeding. The seed won't come up in the fall, and they'll get real significant dormancy breaking into flower seeds and get way more flowers and grasses. So that's the most important thing, is planting in the fall, seeding in the fall. And by the way, Quinn, I will stay as long as people want to stay. So if you want to do more than 2 questions, I will go to whatever time you want.
We'll try one more and see how that goes.
Okay.
We have a question about a recommendation of sedges for full sun.
Okay, what kind of sedges to use in full sun?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Most of your sedges like shade, but there are some that will grow in full sun. Is this the question then becomes, what is the soil type? Is it we don't have any information on that?
No.
Okay. Dry soils in full sun, very few sedges will grow in that situation. And our go-to sedge for rain gardens and for general prairie type gardens is the fox sedge, sometimes called brown fox sedge, Carex volpinoidea, which also grows in the shade, semi-shade, okay, in a savanna type situation. Okay, it looks similar to prairie dropseed. It has a great form. It's long-lived. It helps to control weeds because it has not only dense roots, it has a spreading canopy. So it's just a great sedge for that situation. There are a few other sedges that grow in the sun, and I tell you, we don't use a lot of sedges in the sun situation, but you've got Carex brevior, and you've got Carex bicknellii, which will grow in the sun. Bicknellii is a true prairie sedge. Brevior will also grow in prairies. They're almost identical. They're very hard to tell apart. Okay, so there are a few other sedges, but I don't use the sedges very much. So I honestly, I'm not really a sedge expert, and so I don't want to go beyond my limited level of understanding of those. So there are other people who know more about sedges than I do.
Fair enough. We had 2 very similar questions here, and maybe we'll end with this one. Both people who really enjoyed your book, but would like an explanation of the color coding in the range maps. So talking about the green, the yellow, orange, and etc.
Yes, this is a big issue. It was supposed to be in the book, but it is not. So to get that color code, they can go to the website www.bonap.org. That is the Biota of North America program. www.bonap.org. And you will, and then go to, we'll see over in the upper left hand side, it will give you range maps by genus, and you click on it, and then it will go, or we'll give you the color code. I'm not sure if you go to genus first, but it'll give you the color code. I think when you go into genus, it will give you the color code, or it might be right next to it, and it will show you that. That was supposed to be in the book, but it turned out that it was not, which is a terrible oversight, but it is what it is. And
It is what it is. I typed that
Yeah.
address
Yeah.
into the chat there for everyone.
Thank you.
And maybe we'll include that in the notes about the book.
Thank you.
So just for everyone who joined us tonight, we had over 80 people, which is fantastic. You will receive a handout to the email that you registered for this program that lists all of the species that Neil talked about this evening. And again, Neil, thank you so much for kicking us off on our 25th anniversary year. I definitely learned some things about prairie plants, including columbine is in the buttercup family. So interesting. I wrote that down. I highly recommend to everyone in Kalamazoo area wild ones to take a look at Neil and Hilary Cox's book. It is definitely the book I was looking for to identify seedlings. As soon as I flipped through it, I said, this is the book that I have been waiting for. So I highly recommend checking it out.
Well, thank you, Quinn. You know, it only took us 22 years to do that book. And you know, I didn't mention this, but we started out like 2000, and digital cameras were just not there, unless you had like $25,000. So we started taking slides, and then digital cameras got better, so we threw away all our slides and started over. It 22 years is how long it took. So we got it done. I can't believe we got it done. So it was a labor of love. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. So
Well,
thank you so much. Thank you, everybody. This will be posted in the next couple of days on the Kalamazoo Area Wild Ones YouTube channel. Thank you again, Neil. Thank you, everybody. Good night.